"We're giving the equity to Lucas," my father said, standing at the head of the boardroom table. "You're done here. Get out." He did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. The sentence had already been rehearsed with counsel. The slide behind him still displayed the acquisition headline: $1.2 billion strategic purchase agreement. My name was on the founding line beneath the company logo, but no one addressed me directly. The bankers sat with neutral expressions. The acquiring firm's transition team watched quietly. My brother kept his hands folded in front of him, posture composed, as if this had always been inevitable. "This leadership transition reflects our long-term governance vision," our external counsel added, eyes on her printed notes. "Operational continuity will be maintained under Lucas's direction." Operational continuity. On the far right of the screen, a small notification appeared as IT processed the executive access changes. My administrator credentials were scheduled for deactivation at the close of the meeting. My mother smiled in the restrained way reserved for press photos. "We sold our company," she said lightly, correcting my earlier question before I could finish forming it. No one asked whether I agreed with the definition of our. I did not interrupt. I did not argue. I simply observed the structure. Control had shifted in language before it shifted in law. And language, in rooms like this, is always deliberate. There is a specific moment when you realize you are being professionally erased in real time. It is not loud. It is procedural. If you have ever been removed from something you built, reassigned, diluted, restructured out, then you know the difference between participation and permission. Before we go further, consider this. Have you ever watched a room discuss your work as if you were already gone? If stories about corporate power, ownership, and quiet leverage resonate with you, subscribe and stay with me. These moments are rarely dramatic. They are administrative. I did not react emotionally that morning. I evaluated the architecture. The company began in my apartment with 2 servers and a prototype algorithm I had been refining since graduate school. The architecture solved a scaling inefficiency in distributed financial authentication, something most incumbents treated as a cost of doing business. I built the first working model alone. When the platform began attracting enterprise interest, my parents offered capital. They framed it as support, not intervention. My father had experience in private equity. My mother understood board structuring. Their investment came with documentation, but the governance structure evolved informally. We split equity in a way that felt practical at the time. I retained a significant stake, but majority control rested within a family trust managed by my father. It simplified tax strategy. It reassured institutional partners who preferred experienced oversight. I accepted it because I was focused on product expansion. Board meetings were conversational in the early years. Minutes were recorded, but many operational understandings were verbal. My role was defined as founder and chief systems architect. My brother, Lucas, joined later under a business development title. He had credibility with investors and was comfortable in rooms I preferred to avoid. Over time, the language shifted subtly. Investor decks emphasized family leadership. Press releases highlighted Lucas's strategic partnerships. I remained the technical engine but was increasingly described as part of a broader executive unit. Ownership assumptions formed around share percentages rather than system dependencies. Majority equity was treated as synonymous with total control. No one revisited the incorporation documents after our Series C expansion. No one questioned how intellectual property assignments had been structured during those first months when I incorporated the company before family capital entered. They believed governance determined ownership. They assumed architecture followed equity. In reality, those are separate layers. From the beginning, I made deliberate decisions about how the system was built. The core authentication engine was developed as a modular framework. Certain optimization layers were proprietary extensions I authored before the company formally existed. When the corporation was formed, I licensed those modules to the company under standard founder IP agreements, renewable, exclusive but still licensed. At the time, it was administrative caution. My attorney advised that retaining original authorship protection offered flexibility if external control ever shifted. I did not anticipate needing it. It was simply clean structuring. Our build pipeline operated through a repository hierarchy I configured personally. Deployment keys were issued through a certificate authority I established. Root administrative control sat under a founder credential structure separate from day-to-day engineering access. The board viewed these decisions as efficiency. Buyers reviewing the data room saw documentation confirming that the company had perpetual operational access. They did not differentiate between operational access and transferable ownership. Lucas often described my role as head of engineering. It was an easier narrative. Replaceable, scalable, delegable. The acquiring firm's transition memo referenced technical leadership continuity planning. They assumed my responsibilities could be redistributed across senior engineers. No one requested a granular audit of certificate authority ownership or module licensing origin. They believed replacing a person replaced the system. Systems do not function on belief. When my termination was formalized, I had an opportunity to object. I could have delayed the vote. I could have introduced questions about IP chain of title. I chose not to. Speaking prematurely would have reframed the issue as emotional resistance. Silence preserved clarity. The acquisition was priced on assumptions. If I disrupted the process before signatures, leverage would dissipate into negotiation noise. Once contracts were executed, documentation would speak without interpretation. There is a difference between argument and architecture. People confuse access with ownership. They had access. They did not yet understand ownership. So I signed the exit documents. I returned my keycard. I forwarded transition notes. I maintained professionalism because professionalism strengthens legal positioning. Silence is not surrender when structure remains intact. The deal closed 3 weeks later. Press releases described it as one of the largest private technology acquisitions in the sector that year. Financial media highlighted the valuation. My father appeared on a business channel discussing visionary scaling. Lucas was quoted as incoming CEO under the new parent company structure. I attended the closing dinner. It was expected. Photographs were taken. Glasses were raised. Internally, a structured handover occurred. I transferred operational documentation. I ensured engineering teams had updated deployment schedules. I confirmed that all company-controlled credentials were transitioned according to policy. My administrator account was formally deactivated at 6 p.m. on the final day of the quarter. What remained untouched were the original license agreements attached to the proprietary modules authored prior to incorporation. They were embedded in the company's foundational documents and referenced in subsequent financing rounds. No one had amended them because they had never been challenged. I did not interfere with system operations. I did not alter code. I did not revoke any active certificates. I simply allowed the structure to operate as written. Celebrations continued for weeks. Integration teams from the acquiring corporation began preparing migration plans to incorporate our platform into their global infrastructure. Assumptions were still intact. The first internal inquiry arrived quietly. An integration engineer from the acquiring firm requested expanded repository privileges to begin cross-platform authentication testing. The request was denied automatically by the system's root certificate authority. They assumed it was a permissions oversight. Further review revealed that the optimization modules responsible for real-time scaling were governed by a founder origin license agreement. The company possessed exclusive operational rights, but did not possess unilateral transfer authority. In simple terms, the platform could run. It could generate revenue. It could serve existing clients. But it could not be modified, migrated, or recompiled outside the scope of the original license without authorization from the licensor. That licensor was me. The repository architecture reflected this separation. Day-to-day engineers had commit access to application layers. Core modules required a cryptographic key issued through a digital certificate bound to my original developer identity. The certificate had not been revoked. It had not needed to be. It simply was not transferable. An encrypted license file embedded in the build process referenced the original authorship registration. During incorporation, we structured it to grant the company perpetual operational rights contingent on defined governance continuity. Change of control events triggered review clauses. The acquisition qualified as a change of control event. None of this was hidden. It was documented in the data room. It was cited in footnotes. It was standard protective drafting. It had simply been overlooked because everyone assumed alignment between equity and authorship. Dependency is rarely visible until modification is attempted. When integration teams attempted to adapt the system for international scaling, they encountered authorization failures. Not errors. Boundaries. Within 2 months, the acquiring firm initiated a phased rollout intended to merge our authentication engine with their legacy infrastructure. Initial tests functioned under existing parameters. But as engineers attempted to extend functionality, adjust latency thresholds, modify encryption layers, deploy to alternate cloud regions, the system restricted execution. Performance instability surfaced during sandbox scaling attempts. Logs indicated license validation checkpoints embedded deep within the optimization modules. Again, nothing was sabotaged. The system operated precisely as coded. It allowed use within license scope. It prevented structural alteration beyond it. Third-party vendors were brought in to assess whether the modules could be reverse-engineered. Legal counsel advised against it immediately. The risk profile was unacceptable. Operational teams escalated concerns up the chain. The question shifted from how do we integrate to what exactly do we own? I received a formal inquiry from the acquiring firm's legal department requesting clarification on the founder license agreement. My response was brief. The corporation owns the shares transferred at acquisition. It owns operational rights as defined in the licensing documents. It does not own the underlying authorship of the pre-incorporation modules. Transfer of those modules requires explicit licensor consent under change of control provisions. I attached copies of the relevant clauses. There was no threat, no demand, just documentation. Contracts are unemotional. They either apply or they do not. In this case, they applied. What followed was not dramatic. It was procedural escalation. The acquiring firm's legal team cross-referenced the acquisition agreement against the original incorporation filings. Outside counsel was engaged to assess exposure. Intellectual property specialists reviewed authorship registrations and licensing continuity clauses. My parents were copied on correspondence once the implications became clear. The valuation model underpinning the $1.2 billion purchase assumed full technical transferability. Revenue projections were based on expansion into new regulatory markets, requiring structural modification of the authentication engine. Without modification authority, expansion stalled. Lawyers requested confirmation that no assignment instrument transferring authorship had ever been executed. Corporate records confirmed none existed. The founder license agreement had been disclosed but categorized as low risk because it was perpetual and exclusive. The change of control review clause had not been triggered in earlier funding rounds and therefore had not drawn attention. Now it had. My father contacted me once, requesting an informal conversation. I suggested we route all communication through counsel to ensure clarity. Buyers grew cautious. Internal emails, later shared in disclosure proceedings, reflected concern about overpayment relative to functional control. Discussions of indemnification surfaced. Lucas's authority as incoming CEO was constrained by unresolved IP questions. Strategic announcements were delayed. No one accused me of wrongdoing. There was none to accuse. The structure simply reasserted itself. Valuation is dependent on control. Control, in this case, was incomplete. Reality corrected the narrative that had been constructed in that boardroom. Not loudly, but definitively. Eventually, formal renegotiation was proposed. The acquiring firm requested full assignment of the proprietary modules in exchange for a structured compensation package and advisory role. I declined the advisory role. I proposed standard market licensing terms consistent with enterprise IP transfer under change of control conditions. No discount. No operational reentry. No executive reinstatement. Licensing terms would remain intact unless properly purchased. My parents expressed disappointment through counsel. They characterized my position as inflexible. It was not inflexibility. It was alignment with documentation. Professional separation means respecting the boundaries defined in writing. I had been removed from governance. I remained the author. Those are distinct statuses. Authorship is quiet. It exists before capital and continues after it. I did not build the system to exercise leverage. I built it to solve a problem elegantly. Structural clarity was embedded because clarity prevents future confusion. In corporate environments, visibility often belongs to those who speak most confidently in public rooms. Ownership, however, belongs to those who draft carefully in private. The boardroom announcement that morning reframed me as replaceable labor. The acquisition press cycle presented the company as a family achievement. Neither narrative altered the underlying architecture. When the renegotiation concluded months later, the acquiring firm chose to purchase full authorship rights under revised valuation reflecting actual dependency. The final agreement was executed without ceremony. I did not return to the company. I did not attend another board meeting. I did not issue a public statement. My parents retained their proceeds, adjusted for indemnification settlements negotiated privately. Lucas continued in a reduced strategic capacity. The system expanded under its new owners only after ownership aligned with authorship. I began building again, this time with governance structured differently from inception. There was no confrontation scene, no raised voices, no apology, just documentation functioning as designed. In rooms where language attempts to redefine contribution, structure remains the final authority. They sold the company. They transferred equity. They reassigned titles. They did not understand the system. And systems do not respond to titles. They respond to ownership. Irreversibly.